Taiga is the tallest, fastest and longest roller coaster in Finland, and since it opened in July 2019, I've been desperate to ride it. This ride is made by Intamin, and their multi-launch coasters make up some of my favourite roller coasters in the whole world, and this one looked fantastic. After riding over 1,000 different coasters, it takes a lot to impress me these days, but I was definitely hyped for this ride. Would it live up to that hype though, and could it possibly be good enough to crack my top 10? Let's find out. I'm Rollercoaster David, and this is my review of Taiga at Linnanmaki in Finland. Taiga starts by rolling out of the station into a launch that sends you up into a 0G winder inversion. This twists you over to the right, and then the track turns to the left. Next, you enter a banked turn into a long, low-to-the-ground right turn with a banked hill on the exit before you twist to the left into an S-curve that then turns you round into the second launch. This accelerates you to the ride's top speed of 65.9 miles per hour before climbing the 170-foot tall top hat element. You then dive down before pulling up into a long 0G stall, at the bottom of which is a speed hump right before pulling up into an inland inversion that flips you around. You then turn sharply to the left before rapidly twisting to the right in a chaotic section over the top of the station, before transitioning into a downward S-curve that drops to the left to the lowest part of the ride. Next you pull up and dive into a left turn that merges into a barrel roll that twists to the right as you exit and jump up into the brakes. As you can probably tell, there's a lot going on here in this compact and twisty ride. My first ride in Taiga felt good, but I wasn't completely blown away by it. There's a good chance I'd set my expectations for it a bit high, but that was only my very first impression, and I really think you need to ride something at least 4 or 5 times to get a proper feel for it. I rode Taiga multiple times over the course of 2 days, and the more I rode, the more I appreciated it. Both of the launches are good and have a satisfying kick to them, and I like the floaty inversion at the end of the first launch. That's actually something Taiga does really well, having a great variety of forces, ranging from strong positive G in tight turns, through floaty inversions, all the way to some extreme ejector air. Another thing I like about Taiga is the creative use of terrain to create elements which have a larger drop than you might expect. It's built on the side of a hill, so a great example of this is the downward S-curve that goes past a building with the park logo on it, as the drop here is quite unexpected and could catch you off guard. It's actually very impressive just how large a ride Linnanmaki were able to fit into the space it had. If you take a look on Google Earth, you can see the construction area for it, and the densest section of the ride would probably fit into the footprint of a wild mouse. It just goes to show that when designers are forced to be creative to work around terrain restrictions, it can make for a much more interesting coaster than something built in a flat piece of land. One part of the ride that I felt was a little lacking though was the top hat. You do get some nice views out over Helsinki at the top, but it didn't really deliver on the airtime front, regardless of whether I was in the front or the back, and the drop out of it felt a little bit on the slow side. It kind of feels like there's a trim on the top hat, but I don't actually think this is the case. It must just hit it at a very calculated, precise speed off the second launch. The 0G stall that follows it though is quite interesting, as somehow it gives an extra kick of ejector air right as you invert. Like other Intamin stalls, it's also got the kind of left-right-left shake that you experience whilst you're upside down, that doesn't seem to occur on similar elements on RMC coasters. I've mentioned this in my reviews of other Intamins, and perhaps it's something to do with the trains. It's not really something that detracts too much from the ride though, and the 0G stall is really awesome. The speed hill that follows it though really packs quite a kick, and as a male I suggest you brace properly, as it can be a little bit uncomfortable if you're not properly adjusted as you fly over this hump and enter the positive G of the inland inversion afterwards. For me, the most intense part of the ride is the section that immediately follows that Immelman, as there's this really rapid direction change that feels a bit like the transitions on Intimidator 305. You rotate so rapidly around the x-axis that this generates airtime, and the rapid twist here might make you grab onto your seat handles as you're thrown around. To me, it's a real highlight of the ride, and quite an epic moment that late on in the layout. There's never any dull moments on Taiga, and I really do think it's fantastically paced, with every element giving a different kind of force that keeps the ride really interesting and varied. It feels fast as well, as a lot of the ride is close to the ground, and it never really feels like it's letting up or slowing down. Just when you think it might get a breather, it throws something different at you to surprise you. The trains are comfortable too, being the now standard ones that appear on most similar Intamin rides, and they offer a good amount of freedom whilst the lap bar keeps you safe. The track feels nice and smooth too, and riding it multiple times over and over is unlikely to cause any problems. On to the theming, and I'll admit that I didn't actually realise that the name Taiga actually refers to a cold forest region, and not an animal. The two trains seem to be themed around birds that resemble a phoenix, and are actually named Felix and Fiona. Perhaps there had been a plan at some point to name the ride itself Phoenix, but that could have led to some confusion, as there are already 3 different coasters with that name, not to mention the similar sounding Phoenix and differently spelt Phoenix, which are also in Europe. The two trains both look fantastic though, and they also have LED running lights to make them stand out when it gets dark. The station continues the bird theme and sort of appears like a bit of a nest, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the ride's soundtrack there. Sadly, it's a bit too quiet to hear properly, which is a bit disappointing, as the soundtrack is by Imascore and is actually really rather good. The rest of the queue line is also partially themed, but one kind of sad thing is that despite the ride only being a few years old, every wooden part of the queue line has been heavily defaced with graffiti. It's really kind of sad and detracts somewhat from the obvious amount of effort put into the ride. It's also a bit annoying that the queue line barely provides any views of the ride, and whilst there is a window in the gift shop after you ride, if you want to get a proper look, you have to go outside of the park or ride the Ferris wheel. The queue line also got really rather hot on one of the days that I visited, and could benefit from some fans or air conditioning, although I'm not sure whether the average weather in Helsinki would necessitate this for much of the year. Ride operations were generally okay, but could be a bit of a mixed bag. The ride was running nowhere near as efficiently as Tutatis or Taran can, so there's definitely some room for improvement, particularly in the sequence of unloading passengers and opening the gates, where there was often a long delay that felt unnecessary. There's also no single rider line, which is a bit annoying, as often the train was sent around with multiple empty seats. Some of the queue policies were also a bit weird. One time I was a single rider in the second row, and there was an empty seat in the front row, but they wouldn't let me sit in it, and instead sent it out empty. There's a separate queue for the front, but sending it empty makes no sense to me, and it wouldn't increase anyone's wait time. The ride ops were also really quite inconsistent with whether you could wear sunglasses with a strap on or not, as some of the ops seemed fine with it, but others forced you to take it off. The ride also has a fast lane option, which had a few issues I thought. Fast track tickets always seem to get the front row, which is a bit unfair and causes a longer wait for the most popular seat. It can also mess up groups that had planned to ride together as it enters from a separate part. Another thing I thought was a bit shady was that on the busiest day I visited, they closed the queue line early, but at the same time they continued to sell fast track tickets for the ride. So if you wanted another ride, your only option was to pay, as the main queue was closed, but you could still go into the fast lane. It's sometimes little things like that towards the end of a day that can sour your experience of a park, but thankfully on the second day I visited it was much quieter, so this wasn't an issue at all. So aside from a few operation issues and the graffiti, overall I think Taiga is a fantastic ride that met my expectations, but how does it compare to other similar rides? Taiga's most obvious competitors are the other major Scandinavian launch coasters, Helix, Junker and Speed Monster. When compared to Helix, Taiga definitely has better launches and is more aggressive, but I still think I like Helix more overall. I think the landscaping is better, and there's a bit more variety in the inversions on Helix that you don't get on Taiga. Plus, Helix feels like more of a substantial ride with its drawn out layout on the side of a hill. Junker is a great ride, and it's been quite a long time since I rode it, but from what I remember, it maybe feels a little on the tame side compared to Taiga, and lacks the intensity of Intamin's ride. As for Speed Monster, it's fantastic, but nowadays it's a bit dated in its layout, although the Norwegian loop still packs quite a punch. Another ride that's worth comparing is Taran at Phantasialand, as I actually think that Taiga may be a technically better ride in terms of its layout. If you strip Taran of its theming and put it directly head to head with Taiga, then I think Taiga might win as the better coaster. But the theming, soundtrack and atmosphere of Taran is just so integral to the ride experience that it kind of makes the ride better as a whole. The landscaping of Taiga isn't bad, but it just can't compare to the immersiveness of Taran, and that elevates Phantasialand's coaster to a whole other level. Overall, I think Taiga is a fantastic ride, and easily my favourite one in Finland. It's a great addition to the park too. Previously, the main reason to visit Linnanmaki would be their classic brakeman-operated wooden coaster, Vuoristorata, which incidentally got stuck when I visited. There's a few other coasters in the park, but nothing else in the lineup is particularly outstanding, and some of their existing coasters are clones, and not very good ones at that. With the addition of Taiga, there's now another major reason to visit this park, and whilst it didn't quite make my top 10 in the end, it's undeniably a world-class coaster that you should make every effort to visit. If you want to know exactly where it sits in my top 25, then check out this video if you haven't already, or for something different, why not take a look at some of my other reviews. I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.